Bit of a hodgepodge of a podcast for you this week. Welcome back to Political Paradigms. I'm Toby Mesmer. You'll be hearing from Theo Bird in a moment. If you want to hear me talk about the Scottish political situation, please fast forward to about 18 minutes or so into the video. For the next 20 minutes, it is me and Theo in a cafe in central London, having a chat about the local elections and what we can expect, and sort of previewing everything we'll be talking about in the aftermath on the podcast next week. So, Theo, you were saying you actually are not keen on sort of local elections, mayoral elections. Give me your case for why they don't matter before we talk about them incessantly.
I don't think London's had proper levels of devolution for them to be anything other than really an opinion poll.
Right.
The only major... again, I think the debate around the performance of mayors is really just how they represent the opinion of their parties. I know mayors often can outperform their parties or opinion can differ, such as, Johnson. But outside of ULEZ, there's very little that kind of...
That's the only local kind of issue.
Yeah. So, or the whole thing with Lee Anderson.
Okay, so we'll start with London, because we're here. So you think this is just a plebiscite on people not liking the Conservative Party, basically?
I think local elections, yes.
Yeah.
Mayoral elections, again, I think, especially so.
Now, the big interesting thing about the London mayoral election is, because they've got rid of, ranked choice.
Yeah.
The thing about it is, people used to be able to vote. You sort of had an anti-Tory majority. People would vote Green. I think the Greens got somewhere near 10% last time.
Yeah.
You go in your second round. First round, it was actually very close between Labour and Tory.
Yeah.
Second round, all those Green and Lib Dem voters, their second preference was Sadiq Khan.
Oh, yeah.
Sadiq Khan clearly wins. Do you think that puts Labour at risk here? Or do you think Susan Hall is just a bridge too far? What's your prediction for the London mayoral election?
I think in the first round they could do really badly, because I know the Labour Party nationwide, especially Starmer, is not as popular as he could be.
So what, you think Sadiq Khan might... Again, the risk is there is no second round now. So do you think Sadiq Khan may underperform? Sort of the national... It's obviously Labour in London right now, miles and miles and miles ahead.
Yes.
You think Sadiq Khan may only be a mile ahead instead of miles?
I think if they hadn't taken that move, I think he would be a lot more threatened. But I think he will blitz it inevitably. Now people don't have the choice of showing
discontent. And he is not popular. I mean, you're in London more than me.
Yeah.
What's the average, not like the people who are already against it, what's the average person's view of Sadiq Khan, would you say?
One thing you got to know about London is you can live here for years and really not speak to any other Londoners.
So we have no idea.
We have no idea.
We just know he has bad approval ratings.
Exactly.
And he's probably going to win.
And a few people on the outskirts like ULEZ.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So the polling's tightened up a bit. I mean, if we want to do a prediction, I'm saying there'll be some vote going to the likes of the Greens. Maybe not as big as it would have been because people know there's a risk. I reckon the Sadiq Khan win is probably between 5 and 10 points. I don't think it's going to be a big double-digit win. Would you say that's in line with your thinking?
Perhaps, yes. And I'd say a lot of that would come down to... I think there will be a lot of third-party and independent candidate popularity. You've got more and more legitimate candidates piling in. I'm not talking about Nico or Milanas, but, Andreas from there. Seeing this guy's vans all over the place. Just more independent candidates. The Green Party, third parties, Reform. I don't think it'd do too badly. So I think the margin of victory might not be massive. I don't think it ever is in the mayoral election.
I think the Tories will use that as a way of saying, look, we're actually more popular. When it's not, it's about Sadiq Khan.
Another excuse, yeah. It's about Sadiq Khan and it's London.
Yeah. Sadiq Khan is going to do a lot worse than Labour will in the general election in London, I would say. It looks like in the national level, London may be a Tory-free zone. All those seats are either going to be Labour or they're going to be Lib Dem. Or...
I mean, London is like a blot of red in a sea of blue on the map.
And that red is going to seep out to the outskirts this cycle, I think.
Yeah, even the investment belt.
Exactly, this is it, the investment belt, those swing seats, or even relatively Tory provincial seats. All those people, those latte drinkers like ourselves, they're all leaving the Conservative fold.
We're getting a lot of books from the latte drinkers. I think we need to keep it down a bit.
So,
Another thing I think is interesting about the mayoral elections is the difference between sort of the idea of it being a referendum. So if we look at the two key mayoral elections, in my view, for what happens to Rishi Sunak after this, it's Andy Street in the Midlands and it's Ben Houchen in Teesside. They are in areas that right now Labour is miles ahead, and if there was a general election, Labour would win both these areas by a wide margin. But in the mayoral election, it's razor thin. Tories could win, Labour could win. So I think we may be seeing the beginnings of something as people become aware of who their mayor is. No one can name the leader of their council. I can't name the leader of my council, but people can name their mayor, their metro mayor. I think it's becoming a bit like governors in the United States, where you can win in an area where your party is losing.
Yes.
So I think it's actually irrational for the Tory, sort of the talk in Toryland is, if we lose West Midlands, if we lose Teesside, that's when we'll move against Sunak. But if Sunak wins in these places, that means nothing for the general election. I mean, what do you think about this sort of dynamic of mayors? Do mayors tell us anything, or is it just about the mayors?
I don't think mayors tell us anything. I don't think it's to do with the mayors. I think it's a catalyst, a good reason to move in on Sunak. There'll probably be enough dumb people in the Tory party who think it means something. For those who know perfectly well it's meaningless, to have the excuse to move against him.
Yeah.
Because they do need some kind of event.
A symbolic... Sunak needs a symbolic win, doesn't he? Just like, oh, look, it's not as bad as we thought.
Yes, all the people who want to move against him need a symbolic loss on his half. It may not even indicate anything in order to move against him.
Because it's priced in that they're going to lose a ton of councillors. So they want to be like, look, even these popular metro mayors are losing. It's all Sunak's fault,
Yeah.
kind of thing. How important do you think these local elections are in terms of setting the tone for the general election?
I think if the Tory defeat is especially prodigious, it could set up the final stretch of the election cycle as kind of an inevitable Tory defeat, more so than it appears now. Other than that, I'd give my usual opinions, which is don't read too much into them.
Yeah.
But if the Tory defeat is especially significant.
I mean, if they sweep... So we've got the metro mayor races. There's a load that are held by Labour. Labour will hold in the north. There's the one in the northeast, where it's very interesting, actually. There's some polling out over the weekend. So Jamie Driscoll, the incumbent, was a Labour mayor, obviously. He's running as an independent from the left against the Labour candidate.
Yeah.
And in polling, the Tories have sunk to about 4th place, whereas this left-winger and Labour are neck and neck, with Reform in 3rd place.
Yeah.
So I think that election will be just very interesting by itself. You've got the two symbolic sort of popular Tory success stories, Andy Street, Ben Houchen. Will either of them win? Will either of them lose? We'll see. They could easily both hold on. And that'll be the Tories and Sunak's symbolic win. I think if the Tories lose every metro mayor election, so they don't pick up London, expected. Labour hold all theirs, expected. They lose Ben Houchen, they lose Andy Street, disaster. Ben Houchen got 70% of the vote last time, so it's a big place to fall. And then, if the Tories were to lose in the new Midlands seat, which is a swing area, that looks likely, and they also lose North Yorkshire, that's my neck of the woods. And Labour are quite confident there that they can put in a decent showing. I mean, if we were America, North Yorkshire is like a rural Republican area, if you like. It's conservative, it's rural, there aren't many urban areas, it's not very diverse. If the Conservatives are losing in the rural, second richest area of the country, home of Rishi Sunak's constituency, I mean, where are they winning, Theo? That's dire, isn't it?
It's like the Tory equivalent of the red wall being flipped, it's the blue wall being flipped.
Even more. It's like if the Tories were sweeping like Bristol and London and...
Yes, it's like if the Tories got, one of the central London seats. It's like if they got Camden Town.
Yeah, Keir Starmer loses his seat.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing.
It's like if the Republicans won Berkeley, California.
That's it. It's like if Trump carried Washington, D.C.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? It's off the chart stuff. And Labour are, I think the reality is, there is no, right now, and I think it will probably tighten by the general election. Would you say it's the true right now that Labour are competitive everywhere? Doesn't mean they win everywhere. Any seat, any mayoral race, anything, any council, they're at least in play.
Ostensibly, it seems.
Yeah.
That's the case.
And
I don't think it's guaranteed they'll produce a massive sweeping victory, but I think despite Keir Starmer's brand image, that yes, they could be competitive everywhere, owing to a range of factors, which I'd say their own successes ranks lowest.
you sound today. I think you go back and forth. You sound quite down on Starmer today. Give me your
That is one thing.
current assessment of Starmer.
I think since I've got back to the UK, it seems I've been taken aback. Empirically, it seems, just from talking to people, that Starmer's not as popular as I thought. That doesn't change my view that there's going to be a monstrous Tory defeat, but he does seem to be having issues with his brand. There seem to be people who will not vote Labour because they don't like Starmer, and I'm actually quite surprised about that.
That's interesting. Are they coming from are they swing voters? Are they coming from the left?
These are like
Corbynites.
These are like well, I'll just say it, these are like Guardian Liberals in Tories Lib Dem swing seats.
Right.
I don't.
So they'll vote against the Tories by voting Lib Dem, but they won't vote Labour.
They would vote Labour. Those people could vote Labour. They're like the ones who will always vote Lib Dem because they can't vote Labour in an investment belt seat. That sort of thing. So
these are not people that would have voted Tory last time.
No, definitely not. The closest they would have ever come to voting Tory would be like 2010, 2015, that sort of thing.
Cameronite Remainers.
Yeah, Cameron, big society or whatever.
So you think this is the interesting thing in the data? The actual strong antipathy, active dislike towards Starmer comes from people that voted Labour last time.
Yes.
Labour, according to sort of the MRP modelling, is going to lose, their majorities will be shaved in sort of safe seats, while they'll make big gains in seats they're very far behind.
Yeah.
So, swing voters, people that voted Tory last time, also don't like Starmer, but that's not at front of mind. Whereas these Labour voters, it is, but in the same way, they're not. They can kind of afford to be lost. Would you say that's right this time round?
Yes, I think, regardless of brand image issues, mathematically, their losses are distributed in a favourable way to them.
This is exactly
the losses are in places where they can afford to make losses, and the essential gains are in places they need to make gains.
Yeah.
So the numbers really work in their favour.
So in other words, after screwing them for 15 years, first past the post is Labour's best friend.
I think first past the post has always been the main party's best friend, but
Very
it's
true.
working for Labour.
It's,
This is in terms of first past the post favouritism. This is Labour's 2015, as with the Tories, get 35% of the vote, win a 12-seat majority.
We get 55% of the seats on
something ridiculous like that.
I think with low turnout as well. So realistically, less than 1 in 4 people voted for the Cameron government.
If you account for first past the post, low turnout, tactical voting, and then people motivated by a Brexit election, you have a very, very small percentage of the population who voted with conviction for Cameron in 2015.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird actually that the last Prime Minister, save Blair, to have a genuine semi-democratic mandate, possibly the biggest democratic mandate. It got the highest share of the vote of any party since one of Thatcher's wins, I think.
Yeah.
Johnson in 2019, nearly 45% of the vote on a decent turnout, big majority. Is Boris Johnson the only Prime Minister we've elected with sort of big popular support in a long time?
I'd say we had a strong Get Brexit Done initiative. I think it was shown very soon after that Johnson's brand didn't hold up when tested.
So councils, few thoughts on councils. One thing I will warn people of, like I've warned them not to read too much into the mayorals, even though they are big and symbolic. You want to watch Houchin and Street just in terms of what it means for internal Tory management, not in terms of what it means for the election.
Right.
Those two mayors. In terms of councils, I would say they're not going to lose 1,000 seats like last time. The reason for that is there just aren't as many seats up for councils. So if the Tories lose, 400 or something, 500, and Labour getting 300 or something like that, that is as impactful as when they were losing thousands last time.
Yeah.
It's just the size.
And they will.
And they will. I mean, there's no saving grace in the councils because
Too bad we don't have the European Parliament to.
you want that as well.
Drive the nail
Isn't that
into
just
the
always the
coffin.
UKIP win? They just constantly won those European elections for no
Which
reason.
is really strange.
I think we did dodge a bullet in this country in sort of the late 2000s when the far right started getting some votes, and it switched to UKIP. It's a bit more moderate, like the National Front and stuff. Not
Literal,
National Front,
literal fashion,
Yeah,
undebatable fashion.
BNP were getting like 2%, 3% of the vote in certain elections. It's quite scary.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about contentment with the sort of early 2000s politics. But yeah, councils, it's going to be a bloodbath. It'd be interesting to see how far the bloodbath goes. As I always say, local elections, they don't tell us anything about general elections that polling doesn't.
I think if it's a really, really big trend that can be seen.
Yeah.
That regardless.
Tory landslide, then we know something's wrong.
Something's right.
Yeah. Would make it interesting, but yeah, basically, if you're like, oh, this mayoral election didn't go how I think it would, but Labour have a 20-point polling lead, the 20-point polling lead in a way tells us more about the general election than the mayoral election. It's just its own thing. But
No, I don't care about mayoral elections.
Theo really does not.
I hate mayoral elections.
But this is the big thing to watch on that Friday after the locals, Theo.
I won't be watching anything.
Are you even voting? You're not.
I'm not registered to vote.
You're not registered.
In case you guys didn't know, I'm also eligible to vote in the US, and I'm not going to vote there either.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you've got the most important election for our lifetimes.
Yeah, well, no DeSantis, no deal.
He's abstaining.
Just kidding.
He's a salty DeSantis supporter.
Yeah. And Nikki Haley is a strong backup.
Any final thoughts on the 2024 local elections, or are you just screaming, kicking, and screaming, waiting for the general?
I'm really waiting for the general. We could have had a May election by now. Already. This thing.
Do you know?
I was going to come out to the UK this time anyway. We would have had this in-person meeting anyway.
Yeah.
And if they'd announced the May election, we could have been having a much more interesting conversation right now than, what if they lose the South Bristol second ward?
I think Bristol binned off their mayor. They had a referendum to bin off their mayor.
Well,
Or Bristol.
completely random example.
Yeah. Well, that's about it on the locals, really.
All right.
Humza Yousaf has quit after just over a year as Scotland's First Minister. This was not expected. Even Yousaf's biggest detractors did not expect his leadership to be in threat. This side, certainly of a general election, and maybe not this side of the 2026 Holyrood elections. Well, after dissolving the coalition agreement in place with the Scottish Green Party that had been in place for the last 2 years since the 2021 elections, Yousaf was staring down the barrel of some very difficult parliamentary mathematics. The simple reason he has quit is because he realised mathematically he would either have to do a deal he wouldn't be comfortable with the Alba Party and their one MSP, or somehow get the Greens back on board, at which point the Greens were basically saying they couldn't trust him personally, rather than the SNP as a party. You have the other opposition parties, the Lib Dems, the Tories, Labour, who were all united in wanting to bring down the government and have an election. Basically became impossible, and he didn't want to be dragged out by his fingernails, would be my analysis of the situation. Going deeper than that, this is very much a self-inflicted political defenestration by the SNP. Humza Yousaf came in as the continuity candidate at a time when the Sturgeon wing of the party was in serious trouble. Now, the entire party is in trouble. The scandals and the ongoing investigations and headlines and details in the wake, which we won't get into, obviously, because concerning ongoing sort of legal situations, we just let these things play out, we see where they go. But none of it has been good mood music for a political party. A political party that has been in power a long time. And as we've seen with the Conservatives, sometimes these things just snap. And that might well be what we're seeing here. It does look like there is a route. Towards the end of last week, it looked like we might be heading for an early election. It might be sort of parliamentary. In terms of the parliamentary arithmetic, it might be impossible to cobble a majority behind any First Minister candidate. If, as looks possible, even likely, the SNP coalesces behind John Swinney, it does look like the Greens would be willing to support the government on a case-by-case basis, as has been done in the past, without a formal confidence and supply agreement. With their backing, that would be sufficient for the SNP government to carry on, at least for now, a First Minister to be nominated and put forward and elected. And from there, obviously, I think there could well be the prospect of an earlier election than initially thought. I think it very much depends how the SNP governs from here. You've got a lot of opposition parties who really want an election, and then you've got the Greens that have felt very spurned in the wake of what happened with Yousaf. But the SNP would have a good chance of getting to 2026 without having to go early and without the government collapsing. Any other candidate, a more divisive candidate, you risk losing certain SNP members who feel bitter in the wake of the defenestration of Yousaf, or, on the other side, you won't get the Greens on side. If the SNP were to nominate someone like Kate Forbes, she won't win over any Tory or Labour members because they want an election, and she'll lose the Greens, and she couldn't be nominated or successfully put forward as First Minister to Parliament, even if she could win, and I think she could, a leadership election at this point within the SNP. So John Swinney probably represents both the SNP's best chance of staying in power without having to go to the electorate, and also probably their best chance of not seeing a collapse of their coalition. He's not going to bleed progressive voters to the Greens. He's got the best chance of any of them of appealing to swing voters. I think much like with Rishi Sunak coming in the wake of the Liz Truss situation, although to a less extreme extent, the SNP is rapidly losing credibility. It looks chaotic. Swing voters feel it has the wrong priorities. The SNP is going to be facing a big uphill climb at the next election, very much in this general election, and even more so in the 2026 Holyrood elections. I think 2026 is where they might be able to, potentially, if things go well for them, they could maybe recover, maybe scrape by, who knows. Whereas this year, the general election, it does look, because voters are very nationally minded and it looks like Labour can win, it does look like Labour have the momentum in Scotland in the general election for that specific reason. It doesn't mean voters won't go back vote SNP in 2026. I think that will very much depend on whether the party can claw back any credibility. It may be unable to. The die may be cast. We will see. We're not seeing big disparity in the polls right now. Polls are pretty neck and neck between the SNP and Labour. It'll be interesting to see the impact of this in the days and weeks to come. And again, lots could occur that is yet to be accounted for. Of course, in a week's time, the podcast will be focused on the local elections. We will, I'm sure, look back at this story if anything else happens to do with it. Any huge developments. And in terms of John Swinney and in terms of what happens here, future candidates, SNP leaders, parliamentary arithmetic, we will keep an eye on this on Political Paradigms because, make no mistake, this is nationally significant. A weakened SNP is excellent for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. He now faces to the north a party that's falling apart, and he faces in England a party that's falling apart. And in the coming general election, it makes his path to a majority government that much easier. On that note, I will see you next week. Theo will be with me. Sonny may be with us as well. He is now back in the UK. The trio will be reunited. Thank you for listening to this week's Political Paradigms.